Hello and welcome to the third extra lesson in my Japanese for Beginners series. I periodically do these little extra insert lessons that aren't really in the Genki textbook, which is what I base this series off of. Here I just wanted to take a little side trail from the textbook and explain a little bit how gairaigo works. So gairaigo are borrowed foreign words, basically. Most of the time they're English words. And they're written in katakana. And in this video specifically, I wanted to look into the rules that exist behind how these gairaigo, how these English words are converted into katakana, how they are expressed in katakana. Because once you understand the rules a little bit, all of a sudden your vocabulary is going to increase by thousands of words if you speak English because of all of the gairaigo that are used in Japanese. And just a quick note, I'm not going to actually teach the katakana alphabet in this video. I assume that you already know the katakana alphabet if you're watching this video. If you don't already know that, I have a video floating above my face somewhere that teaches the katakana alphabet. So familiarize yourself with that first before watching this video. Okay, so the first thing that you have to let go of in order to understand and learn how English words are expressed in katakana with Japanese sounds only, basically, the first thing you have to let go of is the English spelling system. And let go of that stupid English spelling system. It's terrible. I hate it. I've always misunderstood it anyway. It's so inconsistent. But yeah, basically what I mean by that is if you see the letter A in a word, for example, it's not necessarily best expressed by the katakana character A. There might be a character or characters that better express that sound. You want to listen to what it sounds like rather than look at how it is spelled. So I'm going to give you a few examples of words that use the letter A, but they're not all pronounced the same way. So our first word is 8. The A part of the word is pronounced like the letter A. And if you look at that, it's actually a diphthong. It is E and E, those two sounds together to make the sound A. And you would express that in katakana with E and E. You would not express it with A. That does not sound remotely like A. Father. This is like the one word in this list that actually is, you know, A would be the closest katakana character to express that. Father, like the Japanese A in katakana is a little brighter. A than our ah in father, but it's pretty close. But here's a really bright, harsh one now. Plan. Plan. Like, especially for like Lois Griffin. Plan, Peter. Like, It's like very Fran Drescher. But plan. It's harsh. And I'd say in katakana, it's kind of halfway between an ah and an eh. It's like halfway between those two characters. And you'll notice sometimes in gairaigo that have the ah sound, sometimes it's expressed with ah, but sometimes it's expressed with because it kind of almost sounds closer to in some instances. Here's another lovely word, saw. So you might think, oh, it's just ah. It's not, it's aw, saw. Notice how my lips are like aw. In lazier English accents, we do sometimes just go saw, like that, like in California, saw. But it's actually supposed to be saw. It's this very forward sound. So in a way, it's kind of halfway between, in katakana characters, it's kind of halfway between a and o. And as a matter of fact, fun little tidbit, I'm just going to tell you guys this, anytime pretty much that you ever see an English word with the AW, aw, it is almost always expressed in Japanese with a katakana o followed by a dash o. Here's another word, 2 vowels in this one, pleasant. So you see there's the letter A in there twice, but neither of these sounds are actually an A sound. So play. That's play, And then the second half of the word, zunt. It's either zunt, which is a schwa vowel. It's what we call a schwa. It's this sound. It's not ah, but it's Or it's just an because your tongue just goes to that letter N, the pleasant. So it's really just it's not even a vowel, so pleasant. So here's another tidbit about vowels. So note that some letters that you consider to be consonants, like in English we're told A, E, I, O, U are the vowels. Sometimes people expand that to say Y is also a vowel, but guess what also kind of is a vowel? W, especially if a word starts with W. And like I said, Y also is kind of more like a vowel than a consonant. And note there's no Japanese character for we, for example. They have wa, but they don't have wa, we, woo, we, and wo. But if you listen to that very, very slowly, if you like make the sounds with your mouth very, very slowly, I'm going to say we very slowly now. We. So note I was making two vowel sounds right there. I was going oo and then I was going e. So that's how you would make W words. Wa, you just use the character wa. But if you wanted to say we, it would be oo, e. If you wanted to say we, it's oo, e. And if you wanted to say wo, it would be oo, o. Oo, woo is the one that's really difficult for them to approximate because it's basically a oo followed by another oo, woo. It's a really hard sound for them to make. So they usually just approximate that with an oo followed by a dash. So ooh, it's not quite right, but it's close. And it's the same with like ya, yi, you, ye, yo. The Japanese language originally, fun fact, it used to have characters for ya, yi, you, ye, yo. But as it is, they just have ya, you, yo. So yi, they can't really approximate that very well because again, it's just e followed by e. So it's just an e followed by a dash. Ya and you and yo, they have their characters, but ye, for example, if you slow that down really slow, the ye sound, it's yeah. So it's e followed by e. So they would approximate it with e, e. So again, use your ears, do not use your eyes. So the next thing you have to consider when converting words into katakana is how long the vowel, like the duration of the vowel sounds is. Like think about where the stress of the word is, like what parts of the word need to be longer than other parts of the word. And in some cases also the consonants L and R are also replaced by that stretchy out vowel elongation. So here are a few examples of how the dash, that horizontal dash that elongates vowels, is used to make words, make gairaigo. So here's de. It's just katakana de followed by that symbol. So de is actually a diphthong. It's de followed by e, but you can kind of approximate that by just going de, like holding it out. Here's another one. It's actually a French word, roux. And that's when you combine flour and butter in a pot and cook them together and then it thickens a sauce. It's a really nice thing to know about in language and in cooking. But roux, you just take the roux character and you stretch that out too, because it's a roux. It's not a roux, it's a roux. Here's another word, me. Me, myself, and I. So it's not me, it's me. It's kind of held out a little bit longer, so it's a katakana mi followed by the dash. Show. Again, it's longer. Show. It's show time. It's not show time. It's show time. So you extend that out. Show followed by a dash. Show. And here's what I was talking about with R's or L's being replaced with the horizontal dashes. Ka. So in this case, this word is car, because Japanese can't say car. They don't know how to make that sound in their language. And it might be confusing if the English you speak is like American English, like what I'm speaking right now. Some dialects in the United States, though, like Boston accent, for example, they don't pronounce their R's in the same way. They might say ka, you know, kind of like that. I didn't say car, I'm like ka. Or British English, I'm going out to the car now, like the car. You're not saying car, it's ka. So just kind of think of it that way. And sometimes, yeah, if there's like an R sound in there with a vowel right before it, sometimes it'll just be a horizontal dash to replace that R. So another thing you have to consider is consonants. We talked a lot about vowels, now we're going to talk a little bit about consonants. So as I'm sure you're aware, if you've studied Japanese or at least the alphabets, you know that the Japanese language, you can't just have a hanging consonant all by itself. There always has to be a vowel after the consonant. Aiue o kakikukeko, sashisuseso, tachitsuteto. There's no just s, t, k, p. Like we have that in the English language, but they don't have that in Japanese. So the way that you approximate just a hanging out, just a consonant, just chilling by itself with no vowel attached to it, if you've heard enough Japanese, you may notice that there are some vowels in their language that naturally get dropped. And terebi o mimashita ka, for example. Did you watch TV? I didn't say terebi o mimashita ka, I said mimashita ka, so I dropped the E. I'm trying to think of words where they drop the, oh yeah, desu. Duh. Okay, so desu and masu, the ends of verbs and sentences and stuff. Yeah, like tabemasu, you don't say tabemasu, you just say tabemasu. So yeah, u and e, basically, the takeaway from that long-winded explanation I just gave. U and e are the sounds that often get dropped naturally in their language anyway. So anytime you want to have just a consonant by itself, what they usually do by default is they do the U version of that consonant, and then they sometimes do the E version of that consonant. And so I'm just going to give you examples of basically how all the consonants are approximated in katakana. So for the letter B, B, they would approximate that with bu. For the letter C, K, it would be ku. For CH, the ch sound, they would either go chi, because often the E part of chi gets dropped, or chu sometimes. For the letter F, fu. For the letter G, g, gu. For the letter J, ju or ji. For the letter K, ku or ki. For the letter L, ru. So if a word ends in an L, oftentimes it will be a ru at the end of the word. For the letter M, mu. Sometimes it's that character that's sort of like halfway between an sound and an sound. It's like, it's both of those and neither of those, but it's a grunt. But that sometimes approximates the letter M, and it sometimes also approximates the letter N, but other times the letter N is notated with nu. The letter P is approximated with pu. The letter S is approximated with su. SH, sh, is shi or shu sometimes. V, the letter V, it's either bu, like a lot of languages don't have the v sound, and whenever they speak English, they pronounce it b instead. So Japanese does that too, but they can also approximate v by taking, here's a fun one, hiragana u, and then add dakten after it. So the dakten are those thingies that look like quotation marks. They basically make the sound the harsher voiced version of itself. So k, if you add dakten to that, it becomes g. T, if you add dakten, it becomes d. And then oo, for some reason, if you add dakten, it becomes vu. And last of all, we have z, it's zu. So you may notice that the consonants T and D were left off of the list, and that's because in the alphabet, for that line, ta, chi, tsu, te, to, they don't have tu or do. It's tsu or zu, basically, for those rows and columns. They don't have tu or do. So instead, for t and d, in katakana, to and do are used. So that's an exception to the rule. And then as for R, I've touched upon it a little bit before. There's a number of ways that you can approximate R. One of the ways, you just stretch out the vowel. Like if it's R or ur or something, it'll just be ah, o, oo. It's like stretched out. But sometimes the ru will be added to approximate the R. If it comes at the beginning of a word, like if it's like ramp, you can just go la for that. But if it's just a hanging R at the end of a word by itself or in the middle of the word with no consonant after it, sometimes a ru will be used, sometimes a little horizontal extendy thing will be used. And again, just think of a British accent and you'll kind of get the idea. It'll make a little more sense to you. Here's a few examples of how vowels are basically used to replace the letter R. Hair for hair, car for car, ba for bar, doa for door, pure for pure. So if you're Sailor Moon fan, season 3, pure na kokoro, they were looking for the pure heart crystals. That's what that pure is. Pure, not puru, but pure. Kuriya for clear. If you play a lot of video games and if you've ever played them in Japanese, kuriya, they always say that at the end of a level when you clear it. I always think that's a bad localization, and I'm mad that that's just like part of the gaming zeitgeist now. It's like that's just the default. You clear a level. Anyway, the next thing to know is when to take advantage of the small tsu. So you may know in Japanese, if you have a small tsu between two characters, it basically adds like a pause between those two characters. So it's the difference between like data and datta, or arate and aratte. You know, you have a nice pause going on there. Small tsus can be used in gairaigo if you really want to stress just the stress of the word, if you want to really put that emphasis onto that character that comes right before the small tsu. And here's some examples. So risotto, that's risotto. And note that if instead of a small tsu you use a dash, it becomes risotto, which means resort. So dashes and small tsus matter. Betto. So in this case, they're using it to really emphasize, hey, this do that is at the end of the word, the o is not supposed to be there. We're emphasizing that it really is just supposed to be that consonant. Bed, but betto. Here's another one, cooking, for cooking. And again, it's just cooking. It just gives it a little lift, a little emphasis there. Smashu, that's another example of you're not supposed to pronounce the oo part at the end. Smashu, smash. The small su kind of notes, okay, well, you're not really supposed to pronounce that vowel at the end of this word. It's just smash. So the last thing to know about making gairaigo and katakana is approximating sounds that just don't exist in Japanese by sort of creating new characters. And we already touched upon this with that katakana u with dakten to make vu. And I touched upon also in my katakana video how you can make fa, fi, fu, fe, fo with the fu character. There is no fa, fi, fu, fe, fo line. It's ha, hi, hu, he, ho. It's mostly H's, and then there's that one little fu that's sort of like blowing out a candle in the middle. But you take that fu character, if you add a small a, a small e, a small e, or a small o, it becomes fa, fi, fe, and fo. That's how you approximate those sounds, even though they don't exist in normal Japanese. And incidentally, if you're typing this on a keyboard and you want to know how to write like the smaller version of a character, you do an X right before you type that character. So if you wanted to type fa, for example, the fu and then the small a, you would type fu, and then you would type, so you'd type fu, and then you would type X, and then you would type a, and that's how you'd write fa. You can also do the same with va, vi, ve, and vo, by again using that u with dakten. So u. And the way I write this actually on a keyboard is if you just write the letter V, va, it'll automatically do this conversion for you. So va, vi, ve, and vo with that vu character that we just sort of made up by adding dakten to u. And guess what? You can also simulate tu and du by combining to and do with a very small u. So it would look like this, tu and du. And you type that the same way. So you'd have to type, if you wanted to type tu, you would type T-O-X-U. So examples of words, if you wanted to write the word tonight, it would look like this, tunaito. Undo would be undo. And in the same way, you can also simulate T and D in Japanese, even though T and D do not exist in their original alphabet. They're chi and ji. But you can simulate them by doing te and de with a small e after them. So meetingu would be meeting, and dina would be dinner. So with all of that in mind, really the best way to understand how gairaigo work, how Japanese language sounds work, how they best approximate sounds that don't exist in their natural language and convert them into gairaigo, the best way to understand that really is just to read a bunch of gairaigo and just start noticing the patterns for yourself. The very first exposure I actually had to the Japanese alphabet was a Sailor Moon coloring book. I learned katakana before I learned hiragana, because that Sailor Moon coloring book, it was great. Like every page was like, you'd have a picture of Sailor Moon and it would say Sailor Moon in katakana on the page. And I would know, well, it's a picture of Sailor Moon. It must be saying Sailor Moon. And I'd look at that first character. Okay, that must be say. I'd look at the second character. Okay, that must be lur. And then the third character. Okay, that must be mu. And the last one must be n. And that's kind of how I learned katakana and consequently hiragana, because there were the furigana, the little tiny hiragana characters above the katakana characters. So that's a wonderful way to learn. Another thing that you can do is go online. You can find a lot of menus. I'd look for menus for McDonald's, Wendy's, any other like American fast food chain in Japan, because most of the items on their menu are going to be katakana. They're going to be gairaigo, and they're probably going to be words you're kind of familiar with, like especially if you know those restaurants. Look up like Denny's in Japan, look up any family restaurant in Japan, any kind of like American like style restaurant in Japan, and you'll find lots of gairaigo. But for your consideration right now, I have a nice little list of gairaigo that I'm just going to go over with you right now. So here's the first one. Oh, and all of these words are words that are commonly used in the Japanese language in conversation. They're not just like, here are some English words written in katakana. It's like, these are actual vocabulary words, like they use regularly. So here's the first one, teiburu. That's table. So again, ignore how it's spelled. There's an E at the end. You don't pronounce the E. Just think te-bo, those two sounds. So te is expressed with te, extended, and then the bull part is expressed with bu-ru, bull. Remember, bu is just a B by itself, so bu, and then ru can sometimes be an L at the end of a sentence, an ol sound, so buru becomes bull. Table, teiburu. Tuesday, for Tuesday. So this is an interesting one because you might think that Tuesday is pronounced Tuesday if you sound it out. It's actually Tuesday. There's like a little Y in there. Tuesday. And that's why they pronounce it chu. They decided to approximate that with chu instead of the fake katakana tu. So choose, zu. So zu approximates z, and then day. Tuesday. Birthday cake is birthday cakey. So again, that vowel sound does not exist in Japanese, so they usually approximate an or that kind of sound. They'll approximate it with just an ah sound. So becomes ba, and then they don't have a th sound, so they approximate that with just a s. So becomes s, and the way you pronounce s in katakana is su. So basu. Day, again for day, we got a nice theme going on with day here. And then for cake, you got the K, for K, it's that diphthong extended vowel sound. And then you got a K at the end of that word. And as I said earlier, sometimes it's ku and sometimes it's ki. And there doesn't exactly seem to be that much of a rhyme or reason. Cake and steak are both keiki and steiki. So maybe if it's like that A vowel sound, it ends in a ki instead of a ku. But anyway, birthday keiki. Birthday cakey. Here's a fun one. Fairy is fairy. My dog in my first host family, she was such a sweet dog, golden retriever, big one. Her name was Fairy, and it was pronounced fairy. So fairy. Oh, that's so many weird vowels. So yeah, you got fair, air. If you've taken pronunciation diction classes like I have, or no IPA alphabet, you know that that air sound is actually like 3 vowels. It's not consonants at all. Air, fair. So air is how they are approximating it in katakana. Fairy. And they extend it out at the end because fairy. Here's another one, highway. Highway. So we're approximating a W in here that doesn't exist in Japanese. So hi, that part's pretty intuitive. Hi. Note how it's spelled. H-I, right? But you don't say hiway. You listen to it. Hi, I. So hi, and then way, way, way. Highway. World Cup. I went to the World Cup in Japan in 2002. So, World Cup. World is, if not the most difficult, one of the most difficult words for Japanese people to pronounce properly. Like, I have some friends in Ehime, and the wife of the eunuch can never say world properly, but her husband, like, his English isn't as good as her English, but he can pronounce world so well, and he's so proud of himself. He's always like, world. Like, he'll say it in her face smugly to troll her, and she'll like, let me see your mouth. How are you making that sound? But the reason why it's hard for them to pronounce it is this is the best they've got. Warudo. That's the closest they've got to world. So let's unpack that. So it's spelled with an O, but the sound, listen to the sound, Again, it's that that kind of sound. It's like an O umlaut if you speak German. So the best way you can approximate that is with the ah sound. So wa, and because there is an R followed by an L, they stretch it out, and then they add that ru to simulate the L, waru, waru, and then do to simulate the d, warudo. And that's how you get warudo from world. If you're a Sailor Moon fan, Uranus goes, warudo, shaking. I always thought that sounded weird. I'm like, how is that world? Warudo! Like, that didn't sound the slightest bit like world to me. But yeah, warudo. And then kappu. It has a small tsu in there between the ka and the pu because they want to really emphasize, okay, you shouldn't really pronounce the u part at the end. Warudo kappu. Warudo kappu. Here's a fun word, daring, for darling. You probably heard this a lot in anime. So the R, that sound, it's just da instead of dar, da. And again, in English, darling, come darling. So just think of it that way, da, and then ring. Note there's no gu at the end, daring gu. And that's because darling, that word, if you're actually pronouncing it properly as you're supposed to, you shouldn't be saying darling and like having a g sound at the end of that word. It's actually an ng sound. You'll find that in Vietnamese a lot. It's just that like ng sound where it's an ng. It's kind of in the back of your throat and you don't pronounce the g at all. So that's why it's just da ding that ends with the ng instead of da ding gu. It's just da ding. Paper. So paper. Notice that first vowel. It's an A, but it is not pronounced ah. It's pronounced A. So pay, and then per. That thing again. So how do you say and You go ah. So paper. Next word, doraiba, driver. If you put those two words together, incidentally, paper driver is Japanese for like, you're a driver on paper only. Like you have your driver's license, but you can't really drive. That's what a paper driver is. So doraiba, the D part, it's approximated with do. The rai part, it's spelled R-I, but it's not ri, it's rai, I. So dorai. And then the ver, it's just va. Or ba. They approximate the V sound with a B in this case. So doraiba. Plan, puram. So that was one of my example words at the beginning. Like you can't really approximate ah that well in Japanese. In this case, they chose to go with ah instead of e. So puram. Again, the pu is simulating a p sound, just p without the u. Puran. If you say it quickly enough, the u kind of disappears. And then the la simulates the l, la, because they don't have a distinction between those two. Here's a good one, surampu. So in this case, you're also using that n character, but in this case, instead of being an n, it's an m. Surampu. And again, a lot of people think that it is n, but it's actual, and it's not. It's not that, it's not m, it's kind of both, and neither. So surampu is a slump. Suichi, that's switch. So notice there's a W in there. We're approximating that with the u from su, and then the e that comes right after that. So sui, sue, if you say it in American English, sue, you have to go su first. So it makes logical sense to go suichi. And then there's that small su in there to show that, well, you're not really technically supposed to voice the e part at the end of this word, switch. Sukato, for skirt. And again, if you're saying it quickly, you don't go sukato, you just say skato. So the part is represented by a, ska, and then the t is represented with a to. Braku, for black, and hoito for white. So interesting on white, a correct way of pronouncing white is not white, it's white. It really depends on what English accent you're using there. In the States, we never say white. You're really pretentious if you say white. But in Japanese, instead of just waito, they go hoaito. And again, if you say it quickly, it's not hoaito, it's just hoaito. That o part just kind of disappears, and it's just there for the h. Papuru, for the color purple. So that sound again, you simulate that with a, pa, puru. Uman, that means woman. And again, they can't say woo, because it's really hard. It's an oo followed by another oo, woo, very weird. So they approximate it with oo, and then man, woman. Iesu, it means yes. And again, they don't have ye. They don't have that sound in their language, but it's actually iye, ye, yesu, yes. Sabisu. So again, that sir, sa. Bisu. So the V is approximated with bi. Sabis. Fayasoru. Sailor Mars's attack. So I just wanted an example with a fa, and that was the first thing that came to my mind. So faya, for fire. You got the fa, I. So it's spelled with the letter I, but it's actually a diphthong. It's I. So fa ya. Faya instead of ya. Faya. And then for soul, soru. It's an example of where the word ends in an ol sound, which they don't have, so they usually approximate that with a ru. Soru. Pretty. It's pretty. So again, this is an example where that T sound is used, and they approximate that with a te and a small e, and then you extend it because it's pretty. Heavy metaru. That's heavy metal. And so I just wanted to show an example of a word that used a v in there, and this one is V, so you approximate that with the U with the dakten with a small e. So we metaru. So again, the L at the end of the word, they can't say o, so they approximate that with ru, metaru. So thanks for watching this extra video in the Japanese for Beginners series. Hopefully that kind of cleared up a little bit how gairaigo are made, basically how they convert English words into Japanese, and hopefully this will help you like go off on your own and just read a bunch of gairaigo, and from that like learn even more, just really internalize these rules and how Japanese sounds work and how they approximate sounds that don't really exist in their language. Check out the rest of this series if you happen to just stumble randomly upon this video. I've got a whole Japanese for Beginners series and other series for intermediate learners. They're floating above my head somewhere right now. And thank you also to all the patrons that make this series and all the other series on my channel possible. Bye bye!